Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the third day of January in the year of our Lord 2025. The first Friday of a new year, 3 weeks from the end of the administration of Joe Biden. What is his legacy? How will we remember him? That's what we will talk about today. And is his legacy the obvious and now admitted years-long cover-up of his declining mental ability? Is it the debate with Donald Trump, which the Democrats finally allowed to expose his status to the whole world? Or could it be his empowering the Department of Justice to conduct warfare attacks against his political opponent while pretending he had nothing to do with it? Perhaps his legacy was his repeated assurances that he would not pardon his son Hunter, then finally doing so while in an act of supreme hypocrisy, pretending it was because Hunter was the victim of political persecution, considering he, Joe Biden, was the worst political persecutor in American presidential history. Surely one or all of these things will be his legacy. If not, then it must be his policy of inviting millions of unvetted illegals into the country, many of whom were murderers, rapists, torturers, killers of children, and, of course, terrorists and agents of adversarial foreign powers. The legacy of Joe Biden as President of the United States is one of cognitive decline, which it now seems was present when he was elected. It also seems true that those close to him knew it. His famous campaign from the basement was supposed to be a new sort of campaign whereby the candidate just holed up in his home, had very little interaction with the people who were supposed to vote for him. His close advisors, the ranking members of the Democrat Party, told us that he was sharp as a tack hardly anyone could keep up with him. What we saw instead were videos of him sleeping on the beach in Delaware, where he spent 40% of the time he was president. 40% of his time on vacation is the figure announced by the campaign, so it might be a little bit more than that, especially when the number of days of LID or LID are considered. That term LID means light intensity day. President Biden had many of those. He conducted only 9 full cabinet meetings during his entire 4 years in office. I'm guessing here, folks, guessing. But I'm going to guess that 9 is the fewest number in history. Trump, by comparison, conducted 26 during his 4-year term. Testimony from elected officials in his own party was that he was almost impossible to reach even for his own national security briefings, which his wife often attended. The question on my mind is who has been running the country for the past 4 years, but especially who has been running it last year? The answer to that question is not completely known, and that is an understatement. Apparently, it was simply his staff making decisions that affected the nation and the world. The American people elected a man who, because of declining health, went on vacation and left the running of the country, the most powerful country in world history, to unelected staff members. That, I submit, is the legacy of Joe Biden in a nutshell. Such a disaster would not have been possible without the complete cooperation of the American media, who did not just underreport his decline, as they say now, but actively covered it up. The videos of Biden wandering helplessly on stage, shaking hands with ghosts, wandering off from the group when meeting with the G7 leaders, all just deep fakes, they said. His slurring of words and inability to speak a coherent sentence were evidence of a slight stutter that he had existed throughout his life. Normally, the explanations went back to Trump. After all, he was an older man also. He had aging issues of his own. Since the election of Trump, with an almost landslide majority, including the popular vote, some in the media are starting to admit what they did. The Wall Street Journal, in a post-election expose, revealed how the White House, quote, the White House meticulously managed Biden's public appearances and shielded his cognitive decline from the public, end quote. Under the guise of COVID precautions, his team created an impenetrable bubble around him, controlling his schedule, keeping him in a largely ceremonial role. The journal went on to say that his staff handles most of the administrative duties, ensuring Biden avoids unscripted moments that could expose his limitations. This manufactured image has allowed Democrats to maintain the illusion of competence while the president has become just a figurehead in his own administration. Yes, the media that is supposed to consist of qualified and dedicated people who dig out the truth and report it to us has learned its lesson. Those dedicated people have learned to spot mental decline now. They know it now. They match it with political decisions with which they disagree. That's just in time for Trump to take office, folks. His mental inability has resulted in no one in charge of this country, and that is glaringly obvious from the complete failure of the federal government to react to the recent month-long drone assault on the East Coast of America politically. The election of Donald Trump, against the will and the best efforts of the global ruling elite, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, that was the story. Biden held on, insisting all the time he was the candidate who could beat Trump. But when it became apparent that was a fantasy, he was thrown to the wolves in a debate against Trump. It appeared he had no coaching for the debate, or whatever drugs he had been on were withheld from him because the debate demonstrated for the whole world that Joe Biden could not possibly be president. Someone else must be running the country. The rumor is that Nancy Pelosi went to him and said something like, "Joe, drop out of the race or I will use the 25th Amendment to remove you." Biden followed her directive. But he had the last laugh by endorsing Kamala Harris to replace him. She met all the Democrat requirements, after all. She was a woman of color, as the Democrats are fond of saying, but she did have some shortcomings that were difficult to overcome. She was less articulate than Joe Biden, if that is even possible. She didn't have dementia to explain it. She could not speak in an articulate manner or answer a simple question. She had no positions on any of the issues that were of vital concern to the American people. When asked what she would have done differently from Biden had she been president, she said, "I can't think of a thing." So, Mr. and Miss Average American heard all that, and they said, if I vote for Kamala, by her own words, my standard of living will be flat to descending, only kept afloat through debt. I'll be buried in debt. I'll be buried in mortgage debt, auto debt, student debt, credit card debt. That debt and that lifestyle is breaking my back right now. So how much worse will it be, excuse me, folks, under this laughing, inarticulate woman on the right side? The top 10%, especially the top 1%, are doing really well thanks to a roaring stock market. There was and is an underlying rot in the economy, which those on the Democrat side of the campaign for the presidency could never seem to understand. The average working man and woman were worried about their jobs, the jobs which allowed them to buy the ever-increasing in price hamburger they used to feed their families, their cities crumbling around them with violent crime revolving door policies from Democrat district attorneys, Democrat mayors, but the only thing coming from the campaign were how they should welcome men in their daughters' locker rooms and their daughters' restrooms at school, how it was vitally important that they be free to kill their children if they decided it would be best for them personally to do so. The thing that demonstrated to voters more than anything else that the Democrat Party cared nothing for them or their families was the open borders policy of Biden and Harris. The border policies produced tens of millions of uneducated, unskilled foreigners crowding into their cities, using vital resources unavailable to Americans. The economy grinds away at the paychecks of American voters, but the migrants still must be fed, housed, educated. The stories of brutal crimes, including rape, murder, torture, rape and torture of children, seem to have no effect on the Democrat candidates, but it had affected the American people. Trump seemed to sense these things, and he hammered away at them. The other thing the Democrats can be thanked for is putting together a way for the United States to be involved in two wars, neither of which held any strategic interest for America. The Biden administration made the funding of the Ukraine war to the tune of almost $200 billion, a cornerstone of its foreign policy. Zelensky in Ukraine, although rather clumsy about it, spends his time trying to draw the United States into a war with Russia, which would have a great possibility of morphing into World War III. Tens of millions for Israel to make war on Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, possibly Iran. Sometimes the American people seem bothered by all the slaughter, sometimes they don't. Israel, with the fall of Assad in Syria, now has a non-hostile corridor in which its aircraft can fly on their way to Iran. Should the Iranians prove more difficult than it was thought, the world's only superpower stands ready to come to their aid and pull them out of their troubles. Turkey is the one that Israel is going to have to deal with sooner or later. If it goes after Iran, that would leave Israel basically with a common border with Turkey. The Turks hate the Israelis with a passion, and I assume the feeling is mutual. Approximately $40 billion poured into the Syrian quagmire in an effort to topple Assad from power. How is it any concern of the United States who runs Syria? Well, you'll need to ask Barack Obama and Joe Biden about that, folks. The interesting but confusing thing about the fall of Assad in Syria is that the U.S.-backed groups of former al-Qaeda and ISIS fighters who have joined together under a different name to oppose Assad, the U.S. and Turkey, both listed those groups as international terrorist groups, yet they both backed them with logistical support and money. There is some good news at the end of 2024. That is that 2024 possibly marked peak woke in our universities, our media, our corporations. The best sign of that is the delegitimization of mass media, which does not have the trust of very many people anymore. People now seem likely to ignore the pictures of what the media tells us is reality. CBS, CNN, MSNBC are all in financial trouble, all laying off their highest-paid stars. The trends, decentralized sources of news. The government in general seems to be delegitimized at this point. I suppose we can thank Joe Biden for a lot of that. Think for a moment about the things flying around in the air over the East Coast, now all the way to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. What these flying objects are is not clear at this time. They're usually identified as drones, but they don't behave as drones normally do. I've seen videos of military pilots who have seen these things while in their fighter jets. They report them as very disturbing in that they are not normal. They don't behave normally. Pilots who have experienced combat in their jets and who are respected military officers say these things are not normal. They use flight characteristics that their jets cannot do. These things, whatever they are, have been sighted all over the eastern part of the country. They have shut down several high-security military bases, including Wright-Patterson and even the East Coast Naval Weapons Facility. So there is something up there, but the government just tells us it's perfectly legitimate. Just move on, folks. Nothing to see here. The fact that the government statement is so ludicrous on its face just adds to the growing delegitimization of government in general. People are starting to accept that we cannot trust or believe anything the government or its spokespeople tell us. Finally, folks, Joe Biden's legacy is one of dementia, which has left us leaderless. No one specifically in charge of the law enforcement agencies of this country. Even the Department of Defense is without leadership. Now we have a drone invasion of our most secret military facilities, terrorist attacks killing many innocents. No one can direct a response. The federal government appears to be completely impotent. That's very bad indeed under current conditions. At least that's the way I see it. Until next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.